Hey there hunters, and welcome back to the Gunners Guild. Today I'm just going to talk about my favorite monster in Sunbreak, Malzeno. Despite all the criticisms I have for Rise and Sunbreak, I do feel like the new monsters are very well designed. They just kinda got stuck in a bad Monster Hunter game. It's a shame, but regardless, Malzeno has been the highlight of Sunbreak for me, and I kinda want to talk about it, so let's just dive in. First, I gotta give it to Capcom. They've been really knocking it out of the park with these flagship monsters lately. Which, I mean, makes sense, right? It's the flagship for the game. But still, the last few monsters have just been some of the best fights they've ever made in the past decade. Malzeno, Magnamalo, Velkhana, Nergigante, Valstrax, Glavenus, well, all of the Fated 3. All quite spectacular. I'm glad to see them keeping the trend. But as we've discussed a lot in these kinds of videos where we discuss monsters, what makes it a good monster? Is it the fight? The gear? The design? Does it need to have all of that? I guess as a flagship, it kind of does. That's typically what makes them stand out. They just get more effort put into everything about them. But for me personally, I care about the fight. Monster Hunter is all about repeatedly hunting the same monsters over and over and over. And the only way to make that bearable is if the fights are good. So that's the real hook for me. Gear and design definitely matter much less to me personally. I know some people really go for the design aspect, but that's second. If the monster is a terrible fight, a la Moldrin, I'm gonna hate it despite how good its weapons are, because the water light bowgun that he has been the best water bowgun we've had for, 2 years now. And the same goes for the armor, especially now that we have layers, it really doesn't matter what armor belongs to what. But I understand the aspect that people want a monster that's really well designed and really fits in with the ecosystem. That's another big part of Monster Hunter. But for the fight, the core meat and potatoes, Malzeno just has it all in my eye. I'm going to judge Malzeno based on the pre-tracking nerf version because his attacks are so much tighter, and that's the Malzeno I reminisce about. That's the first part I actually want to discuss, the tracking. You should all know by now that Sunbreak has had some obscene tracking with monsters attacks, and it was kind of tied to your frame rate, so the higher frames you had on PC, the harder monsters attacks would track, and they would just hit you all the time. There's a couple videos showcasing that, Titus did a good one, and then we got the tracking nerf a few weeks back that gutted all of that. I guess they either reverted it to what it was supposed to be, or maybe even nerfed it below that. I'm not really sure what was the intent, or if they just nerfed it because people complained about it. But what I am sure about is that Malzeno did not need this tracking nerf, and I feel his fight played well into that in the system Sunbreak had. A lot of Malzeno's attacks are very rigid, with very good visual or audible cues, making his attacks very well telegraphed with a little bit of experience. A lot of hunters don't pay attention to the monster noises and gestures, but that's key to getting better. Turn off the background music and really focus on the monster. And I've been saying from the demo that Malzeno is a great monster, is very well designed, and the attention to detail on the attack cues is spot on. Now because of this, I feel like the tracking was pretty justified in Malzeno's case. Most of his attacks could be evaded by rolling at very precise times, or you can play into Sunbreak's gimmick of entirely relying on counters. Malzeno was clearly designed for this, which is why his attacks come out so fast, because they want you to use those counters in an instant. He puts a lot of pressure on the players, and that's where these counter mechanics feel the best. It's a breath of fresh air to get out of those really tight spots that would otherwise kill you. Now, I'm not advocating this counter playstyle of Sunbreak at all. I'm just saying Malzeno being the flagship is clearly where they put most of the effort into designing around it all, so it works very well. It's also one of those monsters where identifying and paying attention to what's going to come after the attack is what can reward the player, being the fight is designed to be more proactive than passive. Now Malzeno's crazy tracking with most of his attacks was also justified because all of his blood-based attacks inflicted blood blight on the player, which, unless the player died, gave them the opportunity to play more aggressively and heal off the damage they took. Just like the rally system from Bloodborne, see? The blood plays into each other, and it's again promoting aggression and rewarding you for it. So even though his attacks have some insane levels of killing intent, the players were sort of indirectly rewarded for it. Your job was to make sure you could just survive one hit and then just keep in the fight. You never wanted to back down from this fight. Now, going into Malzeno's Morb mode, I've always been kind of hit and miss on the emphasis of monster auras in 5th gen, but Malzeno's is one that feels the best, to be honest. The main difference with Malzeno's aura state, or Morb mode, compared to other monsters is that it's time-based rather than HP-based, so depending on how good the player does will determine how often you get Morb mode. Teostra, for example, has HP-based aura changes, so like every 25% or so, he's going to change his aura. The problem with this kind of approach with more HP based is that our damage ramps up more and more as we get, these title updates and get better gear, and so we get those thresholds quicker. And because 5th gen monsters always topple on aura breaks, we get those topple locks far more frequently, especially when you compare them with head topples and then the aura topple, statuses, and Wyvern Ride now. It just gets super easy to lock down these Elder Dragons, which really shouldn't be lockable. Kinda why I miss Arc Tempered Elders. This can trivialize fights when in reality the reward of topple only feels good when there's a fun back and forth to get there, because too much topple makes the monsters just kind of static. Look at Furious Rajang. He's got the aura topples, he's got head breaks, he's got everything. Like, he just falls over left and right. Malzeno's Morb mode is just a really fun time in my eye. While his general attack pattern doesn't change drastically, him doing repeats of his attacks definitely keeps up the pressure on the player. But now it's also taking away the safety net that the counter playstyle gave you, because for the most part, players don't have time to counter both of the Morb Malzeno's attacks. So you actually have to get good, avoid one, and then counter the other, or avoid both. But it's teaching the player not to rely on the counter mechanisms at place because they will get you killed sometimes. And I really like how Malzeno's fight is trying to teach the players to get better by simply taking his existing moveset and then repeating it. And this evolving moveset throughout the fight is enjoyable because it keeps players engaged, meaning they have to stay alert and active through the fight because there will be a change partway through that will catch you, but you should adapt to it. Rewarding the players again for active participation in the moveset, it's the best way to do these fights, and this is why Malzeno really stands out as a good monster. And that's not to say Morb mode doesn't get any new attacks, it clearly does, most notably the blink or the teleport it has. A lot of people don't seem to like it as it feels too unnatural for Monster Hunter since it's more based on like magic and fantasy rather than down to earth, grime and grit like other monsters. It was confirmed though to be just a fast move rather than straight up a teleport, but everyone sees it as a teleport. And also those people that don't like Malzeno for having a teleport are also hoping for a giant floating squid to come back, so we don't really need to listen to them. And Malzeno's blink during his Morb mode is the high tension in a fight that I actually really enjoy, because you never know quite when he's going to blink or what attack he's going to do when he comes out of blink, because he's got a lot of mix-ups. So really you have to stay on your toes, and you have to pay attention to where he's positioned to determine what attack is going to come out next. Does he blink past you and now you've got his tail because he's got those tail attacks that he's always going to go for? Is he mid-distance? He could double jump at you. Is he going to back up and do his blades? You have to really pay close attention to all his little movements. And for the most part, monsters are pretty predictable, and that's why I really like Malzeno. He's just got a lot of different attacks he can do in this state, and so you really can't just go into a straight pattern. You have to look and adapt. Malzeno also has a super move because it wouldn't be 5th gen without his super move, but thankfully he doesn't do it all that often if you know what damage is in Monster Hunter. It's only in Morb mode, and in like the 30 minutes of me trying to get clips, he did it exactly one time. It's a cool attack too. It's not like other like supernovas that are like, just this big giant delete everything in a big circle stuff. That's kind of boring. Malzeno just kind of creates a ring where he drops his big blood orb in it, and then it shoots blood blades out in all the directions, which aren't terribly difficult to dodge. It's just a nice spectacle since it doesn't happen often, and it really doesn't take anything away from the fight at all, so I don't mind it. Next though, I want to talk about the topples, the staggers, and locking of monsters, because that's a big topic when Sarah and myself discuss monsters. We have this weird criteria that monsters shouldn't have too many topples, can't have too many ending taunt animations where a monster stands still during the attack, can't have easily accessible dunks, because all that added together just locks the monster too much and makes it boring. And what makes it weird is that we still want some of these things, but sometimes there's just too much of it and it trivializes monsters. Look at Seething in Sunbreak, look at Furious Rajang. I mean, sometimes monsters also have too little. I know it sounds like such a weird point of view because, how are you going to categorize every monster's itty bitty staggers, topples, all that stuff? Some of them just have a good balance and they feel good. And that's very subjective because obviously the way you play is going to determine, how much downtime is too much downtime. But from my perspective, Malzeno has the perfect amount. Because Malzeno has exactly one stop, which is the other reason why I think he's a great fight. He's just a good old-fashioned brawl. Because he's an Elder Dragon, you can't trap him. He has no air dunk, which is interesting. He has no topples from thresholds or breaks. The only way you can get his one stop in is with his aura break, or obviously you can status him too. But he's actually fairly resistant to statuses. And even with the statuses, he does have a lot of attacks that make him a status immune, basically during most of his blood attacks, which I get kind of feels cheap because you can't really stop those attacks just because Capcom wants you to see them. But with that aside, there's no real cheap way to deal with Malzeno, and this ties back to his original attacks. See, despite the tracking animation being crazy on most of his attacks and combos, he has a lot of what we call taunt animations, where he just kind of recomposes himself after an attack to let the player get damage in. This is the only real chance you have at getting damage in on Malzeno, which is why the fight feels so much faster and more stressful. When a monster has a lot of these taunt animations and a lot of head staggers and such, we get Furious Raging, where he's just a big pushover. I mean, sure, it's fun to beat around the monster that's supposed to be scary, but it doesn't make me want to keep fighting it over and over because it just gets boring. Raging gets, the enrage breaks, he has dunks, he has head staggers, like he just falls over left and right, and so he's not that fun to me. And as I said earlier, Monster Hunter is all about those constant rematches. So the monsters that are fun are what's going to keep players interested longer. And again, that's where I think Malzeno really shines. But that's the Malzeno fight in my eyes and my thoughts on my favorite monster in Sunbreak. I hope you all learned something, and if you have any differing thoughts, hit me up. I always love to talk shop about Monster Hunter. Feel free to join the Discord in the description if you really want to hang out, but thank you all for watching, and thank you again to my Patreon members. Really appreciate all the support I get regardless of the amount. So this one's out for you guys. Thank you, but that's all for me. Thanks again. Good luck out there, hunters. Peace.